All right. Warm welcome to everyone that is in this session today, and I'm really happy to see you all here. And you know, it's this is the last session of this conference, and you know, it's been intense. It's been long days, and at least for myself, talking for myself, I have learned a lot. So I'm very happy to be here and talk and with my amazing team that we have on board for this session, the panel. First, my name is Erik Svanberg. I represent Chalmers University. I work for SAFER. It's the Vehicle and Traffic Safety Center. It's based in Göteborg, Sweden. I've been working with data-related topics for many years, and starting with in this area from the field operational tests back in early 2010s, even starting earlier than that. I think it's quite interesting just to see, because when we started to plan for the Eurofoot project back in 2007, 2006, we talked about collecting 200 terabytes of data. That was a huge amount of data back then. It's not today. It's still a lot of data, but it's not a lot compared to what we have today. So the perspective of this journey and this what has happened over these years is quite amazing. I've been working then with the automated driving pilots, L3 pilot, participating in the HiDrive project, but from this perspective today, I'm representing the FAME project. I'm a work package leader in FAME. We have developed extended or further developed a data sharing framework for CCAM. It was published in late 2023. Today we are implementing this data sharing framework into a data space demonstrator for CCAM, an activity then led by the team from Vicomtech and Marcos. We also did, in the same work package, we have done an inventory of legal for permits, the legal situation for permits in Europe. This activity was done or led by the Austria Tech team, and there's a nice report on the current situation on the legal side for testing on public road. And now we are preparing recommendations for harmonization of these testing procedures and activity led by IDIADA. So this session today is going to talk about federated data sharing and the topics. So how can we advance CCAM data sharing? Let's see. The agenda today is that we will have 4 presentations, starting with a top-down approach, I would say. And then actually in quite unorthodox, seen in the eyes of this conference, we will do a World Cafe style discussions. So we will break out you in the audience and participants into 3 different groups discussing challenges and solutions for legal frameworks, for trust frameworks, and for technical frameworks. I hope this will be a good discussion. So I hope we will get a few minutes to discuss these topics, and then we will do a sum up and come back to this room again for final reporting. Today we have, as I said, we have the top-down approach. We will start on the policy level. I have Stefan Bogensberger from DG Connect together here today. He was just warming up in the previous session, moderating the one on the software-defined vehicle, so did an amazing job there. We also have Joanne Pattison from Leeds University, working as a lawyer in this field, in the data side. We have Marcos Nieto from Vicomtech, who's going to present the technical part. So I hope, and myself, I'm going to talk about the trust framework. So this is the setup, and I will then start to leave the floor for Stefan. Please.
Thank you very much, Eric. So, as mentioned, I'll try to stay on a very high level. Sorry. No problem. And then I'll really I'll yield the floor to the experts. But I want to cast a broad view over what the Commission is doing, Particularly with the new commission, there's a lot of announcements related to data. And I'd like to just create a brief overview, seeing as we get a lot of questions, what is the data union? What is the AI continent? What are the mobility data spaces, to provide some substance to it. But to start off, why is data so important to us? Why do we consider data important? Because the future quality of applications of AI models in the automotive sector is extremely dependent and inherent on the quality, the amount, the volume of data that we receive. If you look at generalist LLM models, they are increasingly becoming commoditized. Latest generations of Claude, of ChatGPT, of European solutions such as iSHARE. And this is a reason why AI models are moving, or we see the future of AI models moving towards sector-specific models, which require swaths of sector-specific data, which are not the public data that is currently being exhausted by the models on the internet. From a European perspective, as the Draghi report identifies, this requires data to be fed that is freely contributed from multiple EU companies within a certain sector, in compliance with competition law. This is a high requirement, particularly on the automotive sector, as we see from other geographies that other geographies enjoy vast data advantages. Anecdotal evidence, for example, on Tesla's way of testing, implementing autonomous driving is to create their own ecosystem and really then test and train their models on those edge cases, such as road bumps, to perfect the models. European manufacturers have not gotten to that level yet. So to provide some sense of, this is not any empirical note that I would make, but when we have these discussions with industry, particularly, for example, in a recent workshop on AI in automotive, we openly ask the question, why do we consider OEMs, tiers, or also research institutes, what do they consider as the key challenges to share data, and which data would you most like to be shared on a European level? If we start with data sharing here, there's a fear of competitive disadvantages, of ownership, and then also of legal aspects. So I think those are three aspects that should be highlighted here as barriers, and that as aspects that we aim to tackle with our policies, but also through innovation from the industry. And then on a more types of data that would be shared, I think here the first three I would highlight as particularly interesting. So first, traffic and road condition. Of course, that is highly related to automated driving systems, to autonomous driving, as well as vehicle usage and performance and maintenance and repair history. And that also encompasses different actors in the value chain, right, from OEMs to the aftermarket. So next, I'd just like to briefly touch upon what are these big named initiatives that have been announced on the European level. To provide some context, the way the Commission works, we have a new Commission since the end of last year. That Commission has released political guidelines. From those political guidelines, roadmaps are being defined, strategies you can call them, and then that works towards implementation. So if you look at the political guidelines from the President and then also from select commissioners, the guidelines are to really become a global leader in AI innovation, to boost industrial uses of AI, and that means exploiting the untapped potential of data, but also to ensure that we leverage digitalization to modernize the transportation system. That then translates into a roadmap. So end of January, a competitive compass was released. The automotive action plan was released in early March, and then latest in April, the AI continent action plan. And what is forthcoming later in the year is a dedicated Apply AI strategy and notably a data union strategy, as well as implementing key initiatives such as AI factories, which are very much linked to data. So I'll touch upon each of these elements on a high level. So first, the data union strategy. Why is data union so important, or what do we consider in the data union strategy? The aim is to pool data in so-called data labs, as you see in the AI Continent Action Plan, to organize data from different sources that developers can use to build their value-adding differentiating models, as well as linking to European data spaces, which I'll touch on a bit, and providing data-related services, such as labeling the data, cleaning it, and enriching it. That will allow ways to reduce unnecessary bureaucracy in achieving a data union, in achieving larger amounts of data to be shared in a cooperative way, but also in a value-adding way that is really tangible for the use of academia and industry. Second, the Automotive Action Plan. There's a lot of discussion on the Automotive Action Plan. In the previous session, we, for example, talked about the European Connected Autonomous Vehicle Alliance. But on data, I would really encourage you to read the first chapter on innovation and digitalization, and there are a few key paragraphs on data. As you're probably all aware, the issue of in-vehicle data is quite a sensitive issue for the industry. The OEMs stand on one side, the suppliers, but also the aftermarket stand on the other side on accessing in-vehicle data, and both have legitimate interests and concerns that are represented here. The Automotive Action Plan announces that we first need to evaluate the Data Act, which will enter into force in September 2025, before seeing whether there is a need for a specific automotive-specific regulation on in-vehicle data that would be translated through the type approval. As you have seen an announcement of the spirit of the new Commission, the aim is not to over-regulate an industry that is already under stress, but to rather see current legal instruments that are entering into application and evaluate whether there needs to be additional regulation on this issue. For this reason, with the Data Act entering into force, there will be a publication, a Commission document, on a guidance to in-vehicle data as well, and that will incorporate also an evaluation whether the competition framework, particularly to evaluate data sharing and pooling, is fit for purpose in the current digital age. Third, mobility data space. This is already an initiative that has been running for, or has been conceptualized for a longer period of time. But the aim of mobility data spaces, this goes from automotive a bit more broader to the mobility and transport ecosystem, is to have mobility and transport data that is easier accessible, easier to be shared and reused. We see several initiatives, for example, on an industry level, if you think of Catena-X, on a national level, if you think about the German mobility data space, that are good starting points. And the mobility data space aims to put this on a European level. So that means having building blocks and standards for legal, technical, and business dimensions, as well as an interlinking layer. Where we are currently at is that we are building, a preparatory action is being implemented, and the aim is to boost EDIC, or European Digital Infrastructure Consortium, through the Digital Europe program for mobility and logistics. Fourth, the AI Continent Action Plan. So in the AI Continent Action Plan, Europe declares its key objective to become a leader in the development of world-class AI models that are sector-specific. And as pertains to data, this relates to several aspects that I think are important to build up. First, this notion of AI factories and gigafactories. The notion of AI factories is to build factories that are tailored to the development of specific sectors that academia or industry can use that are fit for purpose. For example, 13 AI factories have been announced. One that is very interesting that I would encourage you to consider from the automotive perspective is, for example, Hammerhai, which is an AI factory in Stuttgart that has strong links to the automotive ecosystem there. In addition, the data union strategy for creating these data labs for European data space, as I mentioned. And lastly, the Apply AI strategy is a strategic document to accelerate AI adoption in Europe's most strategic sectors, with automotive being a priority shortlisted sector there. So with that, that's a very quick but high-level overview of the initiatives that have been announced. And now, this also for a basis for future discussion, one thing that I want to bring to the table in this World Cafe setting is what still needs to be done to create incentives for data sharing. And one concept that we are discussing, that we are currently is also inviting input from academia, from industry, from all concerned stakeholders, is the need or the potential need for a European data platform to create shared data labs that serve as a collective resource. What this would mean is to have pooling of data labs that integrate industry and public sector data sets, such as traffic flows, mobility plans, in a pre-competitive environment. And that could then be used as a basis to develop innovation. This means that there needs to be a framework, a legal framework, to have competition-compliant pooling, and particularly focus on non-sensitive data, so that European competition law rules are respected. There needs to be governance, particularly if we think about an international aspect or international dimension of data localization. And lastly, there needs to be, of course, streamlined compliance to enable such data pooling, but make sure that the data pooling is not exploited for the wrong use, whilst ensuring that, let's say, the regulatory burden or the compliance burden is not too high on those that voluntarily contribute to pooling data. So that is an idea that is not currently announced, an idea that we would like to receive concrete input in, and I'm very happy to have these discussions on this point or the points mentioned before. But with that, I'll pause here, and I'm very happy to yield to the next speaker. Perhaps, sorry, I forgot one thing that is important to note. In all these strategies that I've announced, there is a public consultation currently going on. So there is a public consultation on Apply I going on. What I have failed to put on this slide, there's also public consultation on the data union going on. So this is really your chance in the coming months to provide concrete input to policy making. Policy making will, of course, only be as refined as by the inputs we receive. And I think this is a great opportunity for you to also actively contribute. So I'll leave these links. I'll share them with you later, and looking forward to the discussions. Sorry.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Stefan. This was very, very interesting. I would open for just one or two questions, and to be a bit unpolite to you in the audience, I will take the first one myself, because I would like if you could explore a little bit more on the data labs in terms of, do you see that as a business, or is it something that will be funded by the Commission, or is it a mix of those?
Yeah, that's a good point. So there are Commission funding instruments that could be used for the data labs. The idea or the challenge is always how do we guarantee trust for data sharing of a company to provide their resources, or an academic institution to provide their resources for data sharing. So one example how it is done with EU funding is that we have the AI factories to train specific models. You have a certain HPC computing center that develops those models, and then you have an independent data trustee that acts as an intermediary for pooling, anonymizing that data and receiving that data. That is a way that is how it could be function, or how it could be operational through public funding. At the same time, of course, we encourage any private, non-commercial, other means to utilize this resource, and we're open for input in that regard.
Thanks a lot for that answer. And I wonder if we have any question here. There are some microphones, so it's quite easy for you to ask a question if you have. Please. You have it. You have the microphone just on the side. Yeah.
Hello. Just a question about the incentives. Have you identified any incentive, or do you have any example of these incentives that you mentioned before?
At the end of the day, I mean, the quality of the applications you develop as a company, as an institution, is dependent on, of course, the volumes of data you receive, right? So if you are able to contribute yourself, but then also receive in return other data that you could not collect from your own ecosystem to build upon, that is a strong incentive, right? The second one, I think, to highlight is if you are active in promoting or in being able to structure, label such data in a pre-competitive setting, you're able to contribute to building an ecosystem. So that's a mutually reinforcing process to build and to continue to build a broader data platform to create better applications for your specific needs. Did that answer your question?
I think, in an ideal world, everyone will share the data, but it is difficult to find the right the organizations that are willing to share their data. And I'm looking for a specific example if you have found a specific incentive to make them to exchange their data.
I think what would be interesting for you to look at are functional data spaces, for example, Catena-X, right? And there, the incentive is that companies are, well, first of all, there is trust in the data space. So there's not this fear of, let's say, loss of exclusive data for your own right, but also that there is trust that the data space will use that data in a way that does not come to your harm. And then the second aspect is, if you have a functioning data space, of course the incentive is that that data you receive from the data space is better than what you have without it. And therein lies, I'd say, the more commercial incentive, or the incentive to then leverage and to pool the data to such a space to contribute for your own betterment. But if you're looking for answers, let's say, on financial or more regulatory points, I don't think that's the right approach to push people to pool data.
Thank you, Stefan, for this presentation. Now I would like to then welcome Jo-Ann Patterson from Leeds University to have the next presentation.
Hi, everyone. Casting our minds back to the plenary session on Tuesday, there was a lot of emphasis on, look what's happening in Shanghai, look what's happening in Los Angeles. There was this real sense of urgency expressed about the need to speed up the progress in Europe, to develop the frameworks, the processes, the technology required to unlock the benefits of CCAM. And I think as Stefan mentioned, data and data sharing is absolutely 100% the key to this. So what I'm going to be focusing on is I'm looking at the regulatory frameworks that are available in the EU, but what I want to do is look at what does this mean in real terms for researchers and for developers. How does this regulation actually get them access to more data? Will this actually result in more data being shared? Because the law is only one way to initiate behaviour change, and I think the question that came to Stefan before really exemplified that. How do you actually? Okay, so the law is enabling something to happen, but how do you? What are the incentives to actually get people to share their data? That's a very good question, because data sharing is a behaviour. Data sharing is a socio-technical phenomenon. So if where's the score? So anyone that's not familiar with this concept, that this was a concept designed by a guy called Lawrence Lessig, and this was his theory it was a legal regulatory theory called the pathetic dot theory. And just so you know, where the dot, okay, where the pathetic dot. And roughly speaking, what he said was, when you're talking about changing behaviour, there are four main forces involved. So the law is absolutely one of them, but also market forces, and we're all aware of this. Market forces, architecture, that can include infrastructure, technology, but also norms. So norms, culture, what do we normally do within an industry? These are all really important things. And this might be seen as the softer side of law, but it's an incredibly important part of the picture and part of the puzzle. You can't just throw a law in and expect everyone to change their behaviour. Everything else needs to fit in. So I want to dive into the areas of potentially where we're not sharing data, and how does the laws that we have in place now and the ones that are about to start, so the Data Act, which is about to come into force in September, do the laws that we have at very least support all these other levers? So I would call them levers. So market forces, architecture, norms, these are different levers. So there are multiple sources of legislation that enables data sharing. I'm only going to talk about 3, if I can find them. Okay, so, too many. Okay, so GDPR. GDPR, the absolute flagship piece of legislation for Europe, to protect for individuals, to protect their privacy, and also to keep their data secure. However, you could be forgiven for thinking that GDPR was put into place to stop people from sharing data. That you could be forgiven for thinking that, because how often have we heard, if we've approached a company or approached a government agency and a response is, we can't do that because of GDPR. Now, you absolutely can. If you're in research, if you're in development, data can be shared by GDPR. It's just that you need to have certain measures in place to protect the data, measures in place to anonymise the data. There are 6 legal bases to share and process data under GDPR. Consent is just one of them. Do you have a legitimate interest? Are you doing something for a public purpose? Fantastic. You're probably going to be able to share that data. Do you anonymise the data? You can share the data, absolutely. But it very often is used as an excuse, I think, or it's misunderstood to not share data. The Data Act, which Stefan mentioned, which is going to come into force in September, and one of the key features of the Data Act is this idea that users of Internet of Things devices, the data that is generated from those devices, that the user's actually going to have the ability to decide what happens to that data. And they can, in theory, they would be able to say, I would like my data to go to this third party, which could be a research organisation. So potentially, this is huge for researchers and developers. However, there's potential for what we haven't sorted out, we don't know what's going to happen, is if the data within, say, a vehicle, the data sets are mixed with personal data, identifying data, then it still can be shared, but it might be, we don't know how it's going to work if these data sets have also got identifying information. So, and then really needs to be a technical lever in there to separate those data sets out. But we don't know what's going to happen until we get there. Yes, so we'll wait and see. And I think, as Stefan said, it might be that we end up having further regulation to clarify. I think we've got enough regulation, but I think there is a lot of fear and anxiety and confusion about what the regulation says. So the Data Governance Act. So the Data Governance Act. The main thing that I'd like to identify about this Act, which has been around since 2023, is the concept of the data intermediary. So if you've not come across a data intermediary before, this is a concept where you've got a trusted, registered data intermediary entity, and this entity is meant to be able to bring together data holders and data users. It's meant to create this trustworthy environment. It's meant to deal with this issue of trust, to say, for people to feel safe about providing their data to a data intermediary, and then data users can also have some confidence about the data that they're getting. Now, it's only been around, so this concept has only been around for a couple of years, and there was a study, I apologise I don't have this reference for the screen, but there was a really interesting study that was done on all of the current data intermediaries which exist. And they were looking at the providers of the data and looking at the reasons why they actually gave their data to a data intermediary. And the only 2 reasons that were identified was, one, they wanted to monetize their data. So they wanted to be put in touch with a data user that was going to pay for the data. The second reason was they legally had to share the data for some reason, by contract or by legislation, and they were just using the data intermediary for that. What was not on the list was a provider that said, I really want to supercharge innovation and I really want to help mankind by providing my data. That was not on the list. That was not on the list. So I think what I'm trying to get at is that I think we do have enough law. The law is there to enable data sharing. It really is. Any issues that arise in terms of data sharing, I really think come down to these other aspects. You know, do we have the right market? Do we have the correct technical software, or do we have the right technical means to share the data? And what's normal in the industry? Because at the moment we are used to, OEMs are used to they're used to getting data and keeping it for themselves. They're certainly not used to, not in the habit of obtaining data with a view to sharing it widely. That's just not the culture. So when you're talking about because if you talk about public data sets, for example, we have the legislation to have access to public data sets. However, what researchers will tell you, depending on what country you're in, depending on what jurisdiction you're in, the parameters of data that you can access, the volume of data that you can access, the quality of the data, that varies. But if you ask a government agency, are you sharing data? They'll tell you yes. Research projects. So research projects, we learnt again at the plenary, research projects are sharing, they are sharing data. That's what we were told, which is absolutely fantastic. But what I would like to know is, are we sharing data urgently, or are we sharing data right at the end of the project after we've published, when we actually collected the data 6 years ago? So I don't know. That's something that perhaps we can talk about. And OEMs, when you're talking about private and commercial data, OEMs are absolutely allowed to share data. They definitely are. It's just that there is, as Stefan identified, even though there are protections for intellectual property, there are protections for trade secrets, there's protections for privacy. All of this exists in the law, but there's this incredible hesitancy within the industry. And if we had a situation where the culture was different, the culture of data sharing was different, and we had a situation where we had OEMs more freely sharing their data, this could be the thing that could create a much stronger, more vibrant CCAM community within Europe if we had access to this data, because that's what we're missing. We're missing volume of data and we're missing quality data. And it's not because the laws aren't there to let it happen. So what I would like, and these are the types of things that I'd like to talk about in the World Cafe. I want to talk about so people who will end up in my group. I would like to find out about people's experience in sharing data, good and bad. And I think, and to go back to your question, so what incentives? Because I don't know the answer to that. What would incentivise an OEM who doesn't have to give you their data? What would incentivise them? When you're not already working with them on a project, how do we convince someone who doesn't have to give you their data to share their data? I mean, I would like to talk about this in the World Cafe. Yeah, so I'd look forward to speaking with you in a smaller group format, and hopefully we can get to the bottom of that. What do you think?
Great, thanks, Joe. I have one question, and partly you already answered to it. But what would be, from your side, what would be the readiness for let's say, the Data Act that comes into place in September. Yeah, that would be, yeah.
Yeah, so it would be whether or not the readiness for companies when the Data Act comes in is in what state are their data sets? Are their data sets, is the technology, what has been the culture, for starters, in terms of when you're actually acquiring that data? What have you done with it and how have you stored it and how have you categorized it? And do you actually have the technology available so that you can extract the data and actually hand that over, separated from, hopefully, separate the aggregated data, separated from identifying information, for example. So I think we'll find out very quickly how that's going to go.
Right. Do we have any question from the audience on this? Yes, please.
Yeah, it works. So I have one general question because I think it fits here best. Just as an opinion and probably later for a discussion, when we are speaking of sharing data, I'm absolutely for it, but the problem is when we are sharing the data, we are no closed space. So also when we try to catch up to the US, for example, they will get our data too, and China will get our data too. But we want to have it in Europe, share the data. How do you reflect on that?
Yeah, that's a very good question. So, for example, using a data intermediary, for example, that would be more in a closed environment. So, in a data intermediary, it would be part of the role of the intermediary to make sure that there are technological barriers in there that data that is shared within an intermediary can't then be shared to parties that you don't want to share that data with. So I understand that there is a need to say, okay, I want to share my data, but I want to share my data within a certain class, for example. Is that what you're getting at? Yeah, I do think that we have the ability to do that.
Yes.
Yes, that spawns a question to me. You're from the University of Leeds, and that's in the UK. And we're talking about Europe. Are you a member? That's a political question, of course, but are there legal borders which we also have to consider if we transfer data also to England or taking data from the UK?
Yeah, there's that is an issue which is already, as far as I'm aware, there. Now I've forgotten the name of the legislation. Yes, there is an issue, as in we end up being I think what's it called? A third party, I can't remember. Someone in the audience probably knows this, as in we're treated like we are America or China, for example. But my understanding is that that is becoming less of a problem. I think that there are agreements in place to smooth that over. But yes, I mean we're not in the EU anymore, so yes, that yes, it does complicate things.
But I hope we still feel we belong together.
Yeah, yes, and I can only apologise. I'm very sorry.
All right. So now we have to talk about the on the policy levels, on the legal levels. We will now go into a trust framework. And so my idea for this is just to present how this the trust framework works in academia, and just to kind of think of, can this also be then applied to authorities, to businesses, in a combination. So let's see. Who am I? So my name is Erik Svanberg. I represent Chalmers University. It's the Department of Electrical Engineering, and the authorized signatory is the PI Ragne Emardsson. So this is quite important, and the very cryptic term AL2 stands for Assurance Level 2. And this is what we, as the Chalmers, has agreed upon when we moved into the collaboration with other universities in Europe. We have adopted assurance level 2. It's a quite big set of requirements that needs to be fed into this, and it's important because this is something that I will represent when I'm entering the digital world. But before that, the authentication in real life then is that I will need a driver license, I will need my passport, I would have my contract of employment signed by both parties. I might need a passcard to the premises, and I get a user account. So I have this user account, and I can use digital resources. So we have a trust within Chalmers. So that is kind of agreed upon. There are, of course, many other different topics to this, but this is kind of the trust mechanisms that we have from starting point. If I'm asking for resources outside of Chalmers, then I might get a user password from someone that sent this to me, or I might get a digital certificate from someone. But to what extent do they know that I am representing myself and I'm representing Chalmers University, and the assigned authority is Ragnar Emartsson? It's not very easy. So what we have been doing in the trust framework for academia is that there's been a need for collaborating in using digital infrastructures for a long time. So, and these infrastructures are quite massive. It could be high performance computing in the beginning. It was maybe storage that has been used, but lately it's been GPUs. The trust framework that is in Sweden is called then SWAM ID. It's compliant with EduGain, and that is where you have this, the assurance level 1 to 3. So this means that I can issue a certificate within Chalmers that holds the information on my name, my email, my affiliation, that means Chalmers University, and also the structure, the Department of Electrical Engineering. It knows who my PI is, the authorized signatory, and we have the assurance level from Chalmers. So I had this really interesting experience because I've been working for Chalmers for quite some years, and then I wanted to issue this certificate. And then the guy that I talked to, that I've been working with for 5 years, he asked me, okay, can you come and show me your passport? And then I had to go to him and show my passport so he could see that I really am who I say I am. This means that I go up to assurance level 2. If you would go to assurance level 3, then you need to have two-factor authentication. So that means that using this certificate, I cannot really use all the resources available in the European research framework because I would need assurance level 3. Then we need to do some in-between fix for that one. But that is how it works. So what I also can do in this trust framework is that I can create these robot certificates, which means that I can host a service that says this service is, the responsible person is Erik Svanberg, and you have the PI that is the legally responsible. So you have this kind of trust component, or the structure for this is as part of it. So I can create the service, and that is quite handy for setting up let's say, service in a data space, because this service is then authorized as myself, Erik Svanberg. It represents Chalmers, and everyone knows who is responsible for this in terms of legal matters, and they can also contact me if there's anything wrong with this or something like that. There is a need for reissuing these certificates, this is actually a problem just as we speak. So I have some problems now to reissue this because we are switching the service, but I hope this will be sorted out. And when I ask for resources, computational resources, GPU resources at whatever center in all over Europe, then I need my PI needs to authorize this, because I cannot just ask for resources. I'm not entitled to do so. So we have built this trust framework when, of course, the technical setup of this is quite massive, I would say, because we need a lot of things to be in place at Chalmers to be allowed to have this assurance level 2. The problem of this that I can see in terms of looking broader, if we would put this into a business perspective, is that this is quite a lot of work that needs to be put into this, and a small company might not be able to do so. So it's a bit of a problem there. But for larger companies, for authorities, this is the approach of this is something that works. So this EduGain is then implemented for academia, and you can actually have resources to be used on a global level. There are some that are compliant with this schema also outside of Europe. But how can we then implement this for businesses? So my access ID is something that is promising in that sense, but that is still to be accessing research resources. So let's say a company would like to use the resources from that is available, let's say within a SNCC or something in Sweden, the High Performance Computing Center. Then you can ask using this My Access ID, and there is a link. But we need to have this information on affiliation. We need to have the affiliation assurance level, how they are compliant with this. We need to know who the authorized signatory is. And I think there are many initiatives that is happening. So the EIDAS regulation has been in place for some time. So I can authenticate myself as a natural person. And there are also in some countries, they have implemented affiliation to this. So let's say in Sweden, there is this possibility to add that I'm also representing Chalmers University. But this is not on the European level. This is in Sweden. This might be in Estonia, maybe a few other countries. OpenID Connect is something that also is interesting, and we also have the iSHARE trust framework that is then more looking into the business side of things, and it's getting some traction. So I think there are this is a real need for having this. There's a need to have this on a European level, and that we actually can know who is representing what resources in a digital infrastructure. I will bring my question then into the World Cafe. So would this approach that we have now, would that be working for, let's say, inside of a CCAM data space or within a data space as such? Or would we need other additional levels of security into this? How often do we need to replace these certificates, etc.? And what is the overhead? So I think this is the question that I would like to bring into the World Cafe discussion later on. Yeah, I would like to stop there and ask if there are any questions to this topic. This was all clear?
If not, I have one, Eric.
All right.
For robot certificates, I mean, particularly for, let's say, a company level, of course, it would be great to have robot certificates to automate the process. What about automating the approval processes, such as the AL layer? If I understand it, in the academic world, there would still be a more manual approval process. How can that be automated, let's say? Because I assume there will be much more requests on a much more frequent level, on a company level, to have such requests for access.
Yeah, so I think, well, that is the case already in the academic, I would say, but then you have this, the agreement is on a high level, so you enter the agreement that we can, that we have this collaboration and or this contract in between, and then you don't need to negotiate this each and every time. So that is on a higher abstraction level, I would say. So yeah, so I think that is thought of. Yes.
Regarding the developments, are these free or are open? Or, I mean, if any other university would like to use the system, or, I mean, to integrate the system into their own system, how they can do?
No, I would say that this is something that is within academia. So the trust framework is within academia and is then. So this EduGain is then moving out, so we can use EduGain for other purposes. So we can use it within, let's say, this to access other resources outside. But that is depending on the counterpart in that sense, if they accept what the academic world has been doing. So I would say that the next step of this is then to maybe see if, let's say, the iShare or OpenID Connect is the kind of approach that will be taking into businesses and authorities as well into this.
Yeah, my question was more if any other, I mean, any other university wants to replicate the same system.
Yeah. Yes, I mean, it's part of the university collaboration. So it's GAIA that is the one that issues this, and so I think that is the discussion point if you want to like to enter this as an academia.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Thanks a lot. Then I will hand over to Marcos Nieto from Vicomtech to then look into more on the technical sides of things.
Thank you very much. Okay.
Maybe I still have one question to that. Sorry for being so late. Yes. This one. Now it's okay. Thank you. Yes, you're talking about robot certificates, and I was a little confused, and it took me some time to understand. We're talking here about automatic vehicles, and the access of that data by an automatic vehicle in real time. Is that a kind of robot certificate, or is this something else?
No, I would say that is a different level to it, because then you need to comply with much more higher level of security. So this is not for the real-time operations. I would say that this is more for, okay, here we have our data sets in available data sets for research, for product development, for more on the static side, not on the real-time layer.
Okay, and so the automatic access by agents, technical agents, AI agents would be out of the scope of your question, yes?
Yes. So that would be the kind of back office solution to this later on. Once you have your data collected and you would like to share this data for some purpose, then you could issue this. Thank you.
So, welcome everybody. My name is Marcos Nieto. Some of you know me. I'm with Vicomtech, which is a non-for-profit research foundation in Spain, specialized in technology development and research, and in CCAM and all the sectors. And in these few minutes that we have, we will be addressing the technical aspects of data sharing. Let me see. Yes. So we will talk about the data space standards first. Then we will say a few words about the journey that the FAME project is doing to build the CCAM test data space. And at the end, we will explore some next steps of both aspects, the general ecosystem of data spaces and the particular goal of FAME in what respects to the test data space. So let's start with the beginning. What is a data space? It is a federated, secure environment for sovereign data sharing among trusted partners. That means that the environment implies having a set of common policies, rules, and standards, while sovereignty means that the data providers retain control of the data at all times. The cooperation among trusted partners is essential, because then the collaboration between different entities and different levels of the CCAM industry chain can cooperate effectively. And the main components or key elements of the data space to make this a reality are of course, the identity providers. We will speak about the connectors, the data catalogs of them, data sources and sinks, so the data journeys in between them, like the data transfer, and some contract negotiations that need to happen in order to establish the policies and the rules that govern the data transfer. Of course, if we take a look at the ecosystem or the current state of data spaces standards, there are several interconnected large-scale initiatives and projects that cooperate effectively nowadays in order to establish the common ground upon which data space operators need to build the solutions. And these are running in parallel, mostly. For instance, and roughly speaking, we can talk about the GAIA-X foundation to specify what a data space should look like, while we can take the reference of the IDSA to explain how the technical implementation of data spaces should operate on the top of a reference architecture that we all together should adopt. While, for instance, other initiatives, open source also, like the Eclipse Foundation with the Eclipse Data Space Connector, provide building blocks or software components that practitioners in the data space technology perspective can use and implement in their solutions. While, for instance, other initiatives like SIMPL is conceived from the European perspective to provide an open source middleware that abstracts data space operators of the underlying infrastructure so that the actual effort of these operators and stakeholders is put on the data layer, actually, and the use cases that these different stakeholders may want to implement. And abstracting this from the underlying infrastructure is a key step, of course, to simplify the life of developers. Then, if we think about the motivation of data spaces, let's recap a little bit. So we are talking, and the panelists here were speaking that data sharing is the purpose of Europe to proceed and be competitive. And data spaces is seen as the solution to data sharing, right? But then we need to talk about the challenges behind data spaces and their utilization in practical use cases. Roughly speaking, again, the main challenges are three, at least, from a technical perspective only. One is the fragmentation of effort. So we have seen that there are at least 4 or 5 main large initiatives that are running in parallel. And they have already strong overlaps and some gray areas where practitioners and stakeholders of data spaces need to deep down very deep into their inner works in order to understand which one to adopt in which cases and which layers adopt each of these different frameworks. So multiple architectures, multiple frameworks is not doing life easy. The second main challenge is the immaturity of ecosystems. In the last couple of years, we've witnessed major changes in updates on several of these open source foundations and initiatives, which somehow produces a moving baseline. And as a consequence, if the common ground is not rock solid, we have difficulties to build upon these moving waters. The third main challenge for technical developments is that some uncertain mid to long-term developments, and that implies, can I trust that this framework that I'm adopting for building my data space will be governed in the long term, or should we need to switch to another one in the next couple of years, as we have suffered in the 2-3 years in the past? So that provides also some level of uncertainty that the technicians need to face in order to select the right technology according to maintenance and support and long-term implementation. So if you're thinking about implementing a data space as an operator, you need to very carefully predict what is going to happen and who is going to support the underlying frameworks. So that was the context in which the FAME project was committed to build the test data space. And we have faced these challenges, of course, and mostly we have spent our time trying to adopt the standards, of course, focusing on the technical ground because, as I said before, there were some challenges there. And the steps ahead of us are to give steps on domain adaptation, and this implies adapting the test data space into specific use cases that may be then provide value to the data space. So let's talk a bit about the FAME CCAM test data space. It is, of course, a specific demonstration project which is focused, and its limited scope is, let's say, on facilitating data sharing, specifically for CCAM research and testing on public roads, to showcase and enable federated data sharing among interested partners. It's typically research projects like the ones that we have been having in the EUCAD conference, and particularly for sharing data generated during trials. That includes sensor data. So we were talking about the massive volume of this sensor data, but also operational data, performance metrics or test results that might be valuable for researchers, but also other stakeholders that might be interested in knowing how the experimentation of certain SIMPL functions or services have performed in certain situations, so that we don't need to re-evaluate everything if this type of data is shared. Currently, of course, the FAME project is not over, and therefore there is ongoing developments already happening. The current situation is that there is a prototype of the FAME test data space that is working and providing implementation that works offering a connector as a service mechanism. That implies that several projects, like you can see in the picture, can join easily, or at least it has been devised to facilitate the onboarding process for projects interested in sharing their research data, as I said before, operational data, performance metrics or test results into this ecosystem of trusted partners, where there is, of course, identity management, and let's say the participants here can adopt the role of either data providers or data consumers. So that's really flexible and bilateral, of course. But the focus for the moment is, of course, CCAM projects and stakeholders around them. There are, roughly speaking, again, also there are a couple of options for deploying these type of technologies, and we've been facing that the choices. So the one big approach is that the connectors are hosted inside a common infrastructure. That implies that there is a governing authority that deploys this system, and the connectors live in a common, secure, closed environment, if you wish. The other option is that each participant is in charge of deploying the connector and, of course, the necessary infrastructure in their own facilities or network. And quite possibly this is the way we want to go, because that, in my understanding, of course, respects the rules of the standards specified by data spaces, but also simplifies the life of initiatives that already, or let's say participants that already have existing infrastructures of data lakes or data repositories that they don't need to move or transfer to any other domain, so that they can keep their data secure in their facilities and connect to the upper levels and layers of the test data space. If we take a look at the next steps, of course, from a technical perspective, there is still a lot of work to do in terms of harmonization and alignment. And this work, let's say, needs to be done before the data spaces can become a reality. We are talking about data spaces as a tool for this, as I said before, federated, secure, and standardized data sharing, which is the ultimate goal. And especially this can become a reality, especially for the CCAM research and test environment, if we select and very clearly specify what are the use cases behind, what type of data we want to share, who are the involved partners that can join the test data space and provide their inputs and feedback. Of course, we want to continue monitoring the technology evolution and maturity, because we will be fooling ourselves if we think that the baseline that exists nowadays, 2025, will be the same one as in next year. So we know this is a moving ground we are on the top of. But we would like also to foster the onboarding process for stakeholder and alignment, so we can be very happy to get participants in our test data space. And for the long-term business models, there are still a lot of work to do in terms of common rules, policies, and legal aspects. But yeah, this talk was about only technical stuff for the moment. Thanks a lot. That was all from my side. Happy to answer any question.
Thank you, Marcos. We have room for one question from the audience, if anyone.
Good morning, Damiano Cafiso from University of Catania. Thank you for this really very informative session and for sharing with us also the complexity of data sharing. But my question is about another opportunity or data collection that comes from roadside units, no? Because now we have smart roads, we have intersection monitoring that are in the property of road administrators, municipalities. It should be also easier to make viable for research. And probably the framework is very similar for that. There is a perspective also to include this other source of data collection in the shared space.
Yes, of course. So that definitely is one of the use cases that we were thinking about, like infrastructure level data that may be provided either as an IoT platform that pushes data continuously as a stream. And then it is, let's say, you can think about the data space as a connector or as a thin layer that provides a way to reach that data, regardless of where the data actually lives or is stored or transmitted from one point to another. So as long as the data spaces are concerned, we are putting the pieces together in order to have the common set of rules, policies, and standards and protocols, let's say, from a technical perspective, to speak the same language so the data is available, regardless whether they come from infrastructure, moving vehicles, or other sort of participants in the CCAM space. Yeah.
I would, though, say that in terms of, there are layers in this, in terms of when you have your roadside units, so that is in the very edge of this system. And I would say that this needs to be at some point aggregated, and I don't see that these are being put into the same data space as what we talk about the CCAM data space. I would say that would be on the next level of it. They are another abstraction layer to it, because otherwise we will get to very detailed setups with IoT functions. So the technology is there for this, definitely so. But I think there's different approaches to how you collect this data and how you share this data.
Yeah. Hello, good morning. Thanks for your presentation. I am Francisco from ITEC in Spain. The representative from the Leeds University was talking very well about the motivation to share the data. I think that from a technical point of view, the approach is quite elaborated, but going to the long-term business model, could you give us some idea about what could be the motivation out of the funded projects, out of CCAM projects, what will be the motivation to share the data in the future in this FAME platform? This is one question. And the other, if you could explain a bit more in detail the connection, because before this morning we had a session about the software-defined vehicle initiative, and this is an open source platform for software. And it was missing a bit the connection between this open source software and the open source data, how this connection is built. Now you have addressed this in your presentation. You are talking about some connections. Could you explain a bit more how this works in practice? Let's say that, for example, the user will download the software, the open source software, and the user will also be able to download the data associated to this software, or how this will work in practice? Thanks so much.
Well, that's a long question, but it may require a long answer. Yes. Perhaps we can discuss this in the cafe later in the technical session, because yeah, there is, of course, a connection between these two worlds that you are saying, but perhaps we can deep down later on. Yeah.
I would say that the interest from the CCAM project has been quite big, because I can see that in this environment, you could already within your project, you could start using such an environment for data sharing, because data sharing is happening in these research projects or the projects, the CCAM projects. This is happening. So, and then once you want to move away, out of your own projects and maybe open up for collaboration with another project, then it's very easy to do so in this environment, once you get to this point where you actually start sharing data inside of the data space. So there is and I would say that it's not super easy to do so. There is a technical complexity in this compared to just sharing some files on Zenodo or whatever. There is this layer, but once you're inside of that, then I think you can really benefit from this and start sharing data for different purposes, and you're always in control over who has access to what data. And that is the kind of very important part of this. So I think the CCAM project has been very interested in this. Well, the motivation, I would say also the motivation for sharing data has been quite big. So as I said, some has been sharing data publicly using Zenodo. They could also use this as a platform for sharing this data, because it would make sense to have it available in multiple platforms. You could also think of different companies having some parts of data that they want to, okay, let's open up for this data. This is a sneak peek of our data that we have that you would like to share. And that is a kind of incentive for them to make their data a bit more available, but also to kind of sell their product because they are using data. So I think there are quite many incentives to use this platform for sharing data. All right. Yeah, so final question.
Thank you. I'm Hiroki Nakama from JARI. We are also working on some data collection in Japan. And my question is about the scalability of data, and how do you keep the balance of how do you manage the bias of the data when you accumulate the data in data sharing space? Do you have any strategy with that?
You mean the bias regarding what geographical distribution,
well,
or what type of bias?
If the data want to be used by every CCAM members, you have some kind of balance of data, desired balance of the data, collected data. So I suppose if the data is, for example, if one stakeholder is accumulating the data a lot, and if others don't share the data, maybe there are some bias in data. So how do you manage the?
That's an interesting question. You mean different type of volume of data shared
exactly.
from different participants? Yeah, that's an interesting point. We haven't really thought about how to, let's say, balance the unbalanced data there, but I guess there could be strategies that could be followed, and definitely each data provider retain the control of the data that is sharing. So there might be ways to perhaps create catalogs and subcatalogs of data so that they could be categorized to some level, and or split them into chunks that can be to some extent tagged in a way that therefore each provider can acknowledge which part of the data is being used. But yeah, generally speaking, we have, or at least from a technical perspective, it doesn't really, it's not in the scope of the technology providers to solve this imbalance. I guess it's more about the governance or use policies of the data space, I guess.
Yeah, thank you. Well, it could be also related to the long-term business model that I was thinking that you can make it bigger incentive for those who prepare some rare data or something.
Yeah, or maybe some credit functions that you could apply, or some, I don't know, something that could be like a return for those sharing more data or more I don't really like to talk about more data, like more volume, but more quality data, or the quality of the data that is more useful for certain purposes. Even if it is a small piece of data, if it is good, it's perhaps better. So the function of the quality of the data or the usability is what I guess is another layer of discussion for the data space, I guess.
Yeah, thank you.
I think it's a very relevant question, and I think many companies inside of this room are drowning in data, different data sets, and data sets that no one really knew why they was collected, and because those guys left the company a long time ago, and you know, you have a lot of data, and I think the first step to this is to categorize data. So you have this metadata on why this data was collected, the purpose for it, how was it collected, and what are the kind of resolution of the data, what are the description of the data. That is the very, very first activity that needs to be done by many companies, and to have that information. And to be honest, I think many of the data sets that we have should be, we should throw them away, because no one really knows what to do with them. And I think in the data space, it could be a very easy way out to say, oh, yeah, we are sharing data in this CCAM data space. We are very, you know, it's a very good job. But what kind of data is it? What makes it? Why do we share this data? Is it just for feeling good for sharing data, or is it for actually someone else using the data? So we really need to be at the first step. I would say that we need to accept that there will be a lot of data sets that we might not need that might not have a great value, but in the end, we will see that there will be maybe quality indicators on the data. So how good is this data? And then you will actually start to see which are the relevant data sets that we will work with. So I think that is kind of the future evolution. But we need to first start to share the data and to actually describe the data. That is the first step. And then share the data, and then to see, okay, which are the relevant ones that we really need to focus on. So we actually we do a change in plan here, because we do have just too little time to do the World Cafe set up, because we also have a bit of a time pressure from Joe that needs to leave at the time of this session. So we have actually a bit more. We can open up for more questions inside here if you have any. And I really think there has been already some really good questions that made us go over time a bit. So Alan, please.
Can you hear me? Excellent discussion so far. Thank you, everybody. I wonder on a couple of points. One is maybe looking through the lens of the data customer and thinking on this. I mean, we're talking about the CCAM value chain and the different collectors of data, but different other participants in the value chain who can be data customers. So let's take an example. An OEM runs some vehicles, but they're collecting sensor data that belongs to the OEM, but the sensor developer would really love to have access. Another example would be some kind of regulator who wants to understand the data that could come from vehicles, and so they could also get. So I think having visibility through the lens of the customer will help us with the data sharing piece, and I'd be interested in all of your thoughts on that. There's one other thing I wanted to throw in, and that is, I think we have to be conscious that there is no foolproof data protection system. So we're sharing data, and nothing is 100%. I mean, we all adhere, if we're large enough organizations, we all adhere to ISO information security procedures. We have to consider resilience, and resilience is about what do you do when you have data leakage. So I think we have to acknowledge that there's no foolproof protection of the data, and it's going to be, I mean, even NSA in America have had, you know, situations which have benefited WikiLeaks, right? So we have to acknowledge that data there. So I'd be interested in all your thoughts around maybe expectations of data owners and how that data is going to be used, and then maybe the perspective of the customer.
Maybe Stefan, would you like to start on that one from the policy overview?
Sure. So first on the customer dimension, I mean, I fully agree. The value of any data sharing is dependent on how it can be used and if it's useful to the customer, not the purpose of data sharing per se, but actually having tangible use. I think this ties a bit to the former point on business model and exploitation. I mean, we have these projects. These projects are limited in time, and it would only be useful if we can, after the project, have a structure for it to be continued or for it to be built in a different setup, right? So I think there are different models. One, for example, that is interesting, perhaps also from the customer dimension, is if you look at how hyperscale cloud providers operate. They want to keep data in their own ecosystem. So ingress data, no fee. As soon as you have egress data, there's a fee charged to it, right? And that, of course, has a business model behind it, but it also has an incentive to build up a large data ecosystem within that hyperscaler, and to keep those that operate in the hyperscaler ecosystem in there, not to change to a different cloud provider. So I think that's a concept to think about. The second part of your question I forgot, so that was...
Maybe the expectation around data leakage.
Yeah. I also agree with you on that point that you can't have this expectation that you will have a perfect data space, and the fear of leakage is there. At the same time, if you have a trust structure, as Eric described, if you also have perhaps an operational model such as an independent data trustee, you can be reassured to a certain level, but you can be reassured that the data you submit voluntarily has a certain has certain safeguards to not be exploited by someone else for let's say untoward use. That being said, of course, having trust structures that will be able to build confidence in the system, and then to also have a mechanism when leakage occurs, how we can limit that leakage, I think are essential to foster larger buy-in, both of the number of individuals participating, but then also of the volume they contribute.
Yeah, so what I was interested in when you talk about focusing on the data customers, looking at this from the perspective of data customers. So this question, which has been a thread throughout the session, I think, is what is the motivation? How do we incentivize data sharing? The reality is there is not going to be much altruism. There really does actually have to be a reason to convince data holders to share data, and this idea of encouraging or allowing data markets to evolve is probably one of, it's not going to work in every scenario, but how else do you incentivize a data holder? I would actually throw that back. If that sounds too pessimistic to say the only way we can get people to show data is if they get paid for it. I would really, the question has been asked quite a few times in different ways. How do we incentivize data holders to give up data? Is it just, how do we create this culture of data sharing? So if anyone has an idea about that doesn't involve money, yes.
My name is Paul Potters. I work for Monoch. Monoch is the intermediate in a lot of CITS use cases who are real-time and operational at this moment. We spent years on this question because people don't realize from the beginning what the data is worth for other parties or for their own good. So I would suggest that in the next steps there would also be a place for a marketplace, the marketplace where you can advertise with metadata on your set. And what really helped in our experience in last year is the data for data model. So if someone is asking for data, that's the moment to negotiate also that they can deliver data as a customer, a vehicle, as a sensor. Road authorities and OEMs have to share data, etc. Because the momentum is very short to have this discussion on who's providing the data for others. And once you have a marketplace there and it's transparent what the data is used for, and there is a feedback mechanism. So when the data is not there anymore, people start complaining who's used them, etc. And then this wheel keeps on turning.
Thank you.
Hiroki Nakamura. Well, from our data collection experience, data collection is really a costing activity, and usually we collect the data something beyond our purpose, and those the data are thrown away after our activity is finished. So, but those waste could be something valuable for others. So if we realize the data sharing community, I think the value can be more effectively used by others, and that can be kind of incentive.
Yes, I think you're both, this is too close, I think you're both absolutely correct about that. And I can't personally see any other way that it's going to happen unless we're identifying this data. Who is this data going to be useful for, and placing it in such a way that it can be accessed and purchased. Yeah, I think that's correct.
Then I will have to counter with another question to you, Joe, then, because in GDPR, it's very much about the purpose of data collection, and that means that you really need to know what you're going to do with the data before you collect it, and you have in your consent often you define this. So how can you then keep this data and use it for maybe a slightly different purpose and really get value of the data that you collected?
Well, you need a good lawyer drafting your consent forms, Eric. That's what I would say.
Okay, I have a different question, which we discussed in the morning session in the SDV, where I would like to get some advice or some ideas how the structure in the cloud about all these data sources will be, because what we discussed in the morning. Software-defined vehicle will have the need to get data from charging station, from energy provider, from toll authorities, from public, civil, city authorities about traffic authorities, weather, and so on. So I have lots of different sources, which are partially different in cities even. Then you have a need that cars from different suppliers will need this data. I guess there's an incentive that those who give the data, they would like to get the customers that they do the charging or whatever. So there's an incentive for sure. What's the structure in between? Because at the moment, all the different OEMs, they have their cloud services and their cars communicate to it. So we have, I don't know, 20, 50 different clouds in there. They have some kind of a trusted communication. Then they have the need now either to contact garages in all the different places, which would make no sense. So you need some clouds in between. Are they national? Are they central in Europe? Because what I, as a customer, I do not like to have different ways to do the parking in Milano or in Graz or in Denmark or wherever. It should work everywhere. So do you have any idea in CCAM how this intermediate network of clouds will work? Are there some concentrators in? How will that be done? And do you have a concept that you give this trust from one cloud to the next cloud to the next cloud?
The last question has not been sorted out yet. So between different clouds, I think that is something that is being discussed. It's been evaluated in terms of GAIA-X. You could, though, agree on the same trust framework. So that is one starting point. I think a CCAM test data space at this, as it is right now, I think it's a good place where you can meet in this kind of neutral approach, where you need to have many different data providers. So as you mentioned in the software-defined vehicle and maybe for virtual assessment, you need a lot of other data inputs, let's say from the authorities. You need data from map providers. You might need data from different weather services. You might need different types of data points there. And I think this to have this in such neutral space is something that is quite appealing to what I see. Yes.
Yes, I understood now how it works. Yes, you asked for frustrating situations for CCAM in the World Cafe, and I want to tell you one thing which I have seen. From accident analysis, it is quite clear that the speed difference, an unexpected speed difference on highways, is the most important factor for non-controllability of a situation, of a suddenly cut out situation, and also of the severity. So the non-controllability and the severity are both affected by the speed difference which is there. Your own speed, you know. The speed of the traffic ahead, you might not see because there are other cars, trucks behind you, and suddenly the truck moves away and you are in front of the standing end of a traffic jam. Yes, communication would solve that, but one of the key points is that you have to transfer your own speed to this network so that everybody knows what is your driving speed in your lane, and maybe also the speed of other vehicles you see. An autonomous vehicle can do that quite easily because it has the information on speed or with radars, on lanes, and it could very easily provide a chart which tells what is the speed ahead on the road. But if you talk to car manufacturers about that, they say, oh, my own speed, I will not communicate because of my customers. When they know that I communicate my speed, then they think, oh, I'm speeding quite often. Everybody knows that. That's not a secret. You can measure it. But I will not transmit it. Even if the car manufacturer says, yes, I anonymize this data, they don't want to do it because they say that will be somewhere in the news and our customers will disappear, will no longer buy our car. Only if everybody does that. Now I come to your dot picture. You have the market, these are the customers, and you have a law which allows it to do it, but nobody does it because there is no trust in it that this data will be handled just for the purpose of making the roads safer, not for collecting money from the people who drive. How do you solve that? Or I feel the solution is something has to be done in a regulation to tell this is necessary to do for safety purposes.
Yeah, I think it's a matter of, certainly you can deal with it from a regulatory perspective, and a contract. Well, first of all, you can have a layer of regulation about everyone must share this type of data for safety purposes. You can have a contractual element to it that say the car owner says to the person who's buying the vehicle or driving the vehicle, I promise this is what I'm going to do with your data and not do with your data. But actually the most crucial part of it is actually everyone understanding that, the person in the vehicle understanding that. And that's to do with the culture and what's normal. And if everyone knows that that's what happens, so I'm going to speed, but I'm not going to have a knock on my door at the end of the day because I went 5 kilometres over the speed limit. People need to understand that that's not going to happen. And that really takes a little bit of time for everyone, for that piece to get out. But I think it's possible, and it's a really good point. But yeah, it's just, because this is such an evolving situation, it will take time for everyone to get used to that. And as you said, at the moment, it's not even happening. So we've got a bit of a...
And I think the autonomous vehicles would be a good starting point. An autonomous vehicle should obey the speed limits. So that's what everybody says. And communicating your speed when you obey the speed limits would not be a problem. And so asking with a law or regulation that autonomous vehicles should communicate their own speed to some data provider who makes them a real-time map, a real-time digital twin of the traffic situation on the roads. That would help a lot for the safety. And this kind of regulation could trigger something. And when you get trust, autonomous vehicles can do it. Why not? Normal vehicles could do it as well. If people understand it's a safety matter, then we are a step forward in.
All right. So, Stefan, for some last words on this.
Yes, I mean, I agree with you on the safety-related matters. I think that's a good sort of flagship for autonomous vehicles. The challenge and the danger is, of course, the volume of data that autonomous vehicles produce. And you need to have the computing capacity at the edge to be able to absorb that data. And you also need to be able to distinguish the signal from the noise. In what, let's say a vehicle is speeding, when exactly is that dangerous? It might be forbidden, it should be forbidden, but not all the time when the vehicle is speeding, it directly affects other traffic participants in the traffic ecosystem. So being able to make use of that data is a key challenge. And so from a regulatory perspective, flatlining, let's say mandating someone to share the data straight out and then opening the opportunity to use for it, I think that is also dangerous because then we create a regulatory burden to release data we first need to see the use case as well. And that is a bit the two sides of the coin. But being able to leverage regulatory instruments to increase safety on roads, and particularly using autonomous vehicles to accelerate such a shift, I am fully with you.
All right. I am really impressed by your participation and your commitment to this session and this very last. Now we have the final words from upstairs, but I would like to thank Stefan, Marcus, and also Joe that had to rush for the airport, but very nice session.